there, it's Twyla. I'm here at Oak Beach Naval Park trying to do my geography in my backyard project. Let's go see what kind of weather we can find. This is an example of mass wasting right here, where the first movement of weather materials caused by gravity falls down at a short distance. This is an example of denudation. There are 3 steps in this process. The first step is weathering, which is the breaking down of rock into smaller pieces by atmospheric and biotic agents. At the top, the second step is mass wasting, which is the first movement that the weathered materials make as gravity brings them down a short distance. And the third step is erosion. But let me show you. It'll go down here to the river, ephemeral river, and a stream will move that material far away from where it originally was weathered. An example of an ephemeral stream. These types of streams are dry majority of the time and flow right after it rains. Once the rainfall stops, the stream will dry out. But since we had rain recently, you see this huge puddle of water, which eventually will evaporate. Also, these rocks that you see in this stream bed, they're all called alluvium. Alluvium is a process by which sediments such as sand, rocks, and gravel are transported and deposited by rivers or streams, which is also called erosion. These bigger sized rocks here, like this, are moved by a process called traction. If the rocks are big and heavy to bounce, it will move by traction or push along the bottom really slowly and take years to move far. And here is an example of a piece of alluvium that has been in a process of saltation. As you can see, saltation refers to the movement of sediment particles in a stream or river by a series of bouncing motions. These particles are lifted off the riverbed by force of flowing water carried along in a series of short jumps and then deposited back onto the riverbed. This process is a form of sediment transport. So if you look at the rock, it's like not sharp. It is actually smooth and rounded from this process called saltation. And where did that other rock go? Right here. This rock, this is an example of chemical weathering, specifically carbonation. You see all the holes. This process happens when it rains. There's carbon dioxide in the rainwater, and the rock reacts chemically with the carbon dioxide. Rainwater and carbon dioxide together form a weak acid called carbonic acid, and when it comes into contact with limestone, it produces CaCO3, which wears limestone away and dissolves it over time. This process weakens the rock and contributes to the formation of holes in rocks like this one that are found in the riverbed as well. This is an example of chemical weathering. All the tops of this rock. This process involves rainwater, which naturally contains a weak carbonic acid due to dissolved carbon dioxide from the atmosphere reacting with the limestone. This reaction dissolves the limestone, creating cracks and dissolving the rock over time. You can see it. This is a type of biological weathering, which is breaking down of rocks based on something biological, meaning something living such as plants or an animal. This is an example of lichens, and they are small single-cell animals that feed off of rocks through a process called ion exchange. And as they feed off of the rock and die, the outer layer of the rock flakes off, so they're breaking the rock down smaller and smaller, breaking the rocks down into smaller and smaller pieces over time. So when they die, the rock flakes off like that, and here's a bigger, those are lichens. This is an example of the biggest factor in biological weathering. This process happens when a tree breaks down a rock. The roots of the tree will grow into small cracks in the rock and push against it. As they expand, it causes cracks to get bigger. Over time, the rock will split apart. This is biological weathering with plants. You see the big tree that broke the rock. That's one example. Here's another example here. And another one there. And another one right in front of us. And one more across the way. There's so much biological weathering here at Old Mission Able. Here's an example of thermal stress. Here in San Antonio, we experience temperature variations that can create stress within the limestone, leading to cracking and fracturing. Meaning it's cold in the night and warm during the day. As the things warm up, they expand, and as the things cool down, they contract. Over time, any areas of weakness in the rock are going to get weaker and weaker, and over time, they will form cracks and break. This is also an example of mechanical weathering. This is the crack, and it's also an example of mechanical weathering because mechanical weathering, which is weathering of rock from big to small, like this, from big to small pieces, or when a rock is weathered down into smaller pieces and is the same kind of rock that you started with. These tree roots are most likely being exposed by the process of erosion, particularly from heavy rain and runoff. This natural weathering process gradually removes the soil that once covered the roots, revealing them at the surface. So the water would come down and erode the soil, which is called a runoff. And I'm thinking that hole right there is a type of biological weathering where animals would burrow in little cracks and rocks, and as they keep going in and out, scratching the rock, over time it'll break down very slowly. If I'm not mistaken, this could be like rills. If you can see, there's like a tiny rill there and another tiny rill there, and it'll come down to here, down to the ephemeral river. Here's an example of a nick point where the water would flow down. As you can see, it has been weathered from the water coming down constantly. Eventually this point here, like it's been weathered back already, but will eventually be weathered back more, and this nick point will migrate. This is an example of mass wasting, where the first movement of weather materials caused by gravity will fall a short distance. So this rock down, all these rocks down here came from up here. An example of mass wasting. This is an example of a lesser impact of biological weathering, where living animals such as mice, rats, or squirrels burrow in cracks in rocks. As they keep going in and out and scratching the rock over time, it'll break the rock down very slowly. And it's located right up there. Zoom into it so you can see it. This is an example of biological weathering where an animal will burrow. Here's another example of an ephemeral stream where it's dry majority of the time, and only after it rains it'll flow. This is another example of saltation, which refers to the movement of sediment particles in a stream or a river by a series of bouncing motions. And as you can see, it's nice and rounded. From all that bouncing motion, it makes the rock smooth and round. Here's an example of an oxbow lake. It forms when a meandering river erodes through the narrow neck of a meander, creating a shorter, straighter course. The abandoned horseshoe-shaped meander loop then becomes an oxbow lake, which is a separate body of water. This process is driven by erosion on the outer bends of the river and deposition on the inner. Here's another example of an ephemeral stream where it's dry majority of the time and flow after it rains. Here's another example of biological weathering where an animal will burrow into the rocks. Can you zoom in there? They will burrow into rocks, and over time, scratching, going in and out, the hole gets bigger and the rock will crack. That's one example, and here's another one right up here. Biological weathering. Here are more examples of erosion from runoff. You see the exposed tree roots.